I knew something was wrong when I heard a click from the outside of my bedroom door. Not the usual sound of it closing, it was the sound of a lock. I walked over and tried the handle. Nothing. Downstairs, I could hear the clinking of glasses, soft jazz playing, and laughter from people enjoying their evening in the mansion. My mansion. I knocked lightly. Whiston, are you out there? No response, only the fading sound of heels on the stairs. A moment later, someone knocked softly from the other side. A girl's voice whispered through the door. Mrs. Kelly, they said you weren't feeling well. I'm just following instructions. I didn't know who they were. But I knew one thing for certain. I was perfectly lucid, and I was being treated like an inconvenience. Locked away. I turned around and sat at the edge of the bed. My eyes landed on the wooden cabinet by the window where I kept things that were no one else's business. The key was still taped under the drawer lining just where I'd left it. I opened it. The file was still there. The red seal is still clear, and my name, Kelly Honora Whitmore, still printed boldly above the words, Legal Owner. I gently ran my fingers along the spine of the folder, then pulled out something else, an old recorder, the kind only someone my age would know how to use. I pressed play, and a familiar voice played back. Once she gets a little older, I'll make the transfer official. Don't worry about the documents. I'm already working on them. It was my daughter-in-law's voice. I looked up. The lights downstairs were still on. The party was still going. And me, I was ready. Not to escape, but to show up with the truth. I wasn't born into money. This mansion was the result of 41 years in corporate feng shui, consulting, not some inheritance. After my husband died of a stroke, I poured every bit of savings I had into this place, sold our old house, bought this land, designed the home myself, a place to live and a place to start over with my son, who was only 8 at the time. I never remarried. My son was quiet, introverted, with few friends, and I wanted to give him my full attention. Once I even turned down a major contract just to take him to a competition. Later, he studied architecture. I mortgaged the house to help him open his own firm. Then he married Mila. I didn't hate my daughter-in-law, but we were never compatible. She liked to stay in control and to keep her distance. They moved into the upstairs level of the mansion. I had only one request: don't touch my office. A year later, I moved downstairs. For a little more privacy, I said, though no one asked me to, I tried to make myself invisible. After I cooked, I went straight back to my room. I took walks at noon and kept out of conversations. I even apologized once when I realized I was sitting in the wrong spot in the living room. Then one day, Mila came to me saying we needed to streamline how the house was managed. She handed me a folder. Inside was a power of attorney document giving Wistan the authority to temporarily handle all legal matters regarding the estate while I was no longer the primary decision maker. I read it carefully, and I signed it because I trusted my son, because I thought they're just trying to help, because it never crossed my mind that one day that very signature would be used to turn me into someone with no home, no say, and locked away like a mental patient. That afternoon, I baked apple pie, just like I always had. The smell of cinnamon still filled the kitchen, but no one looked up. Mila was setting the table, saying nothing. When I placed the tray down, she simply said, "Thanks, Ms. Kelly," without glancing away from her phone. No more mom, no more warmth. I stepped into the living room. A few of her friends were gathered there, chatting happily. I was about to turn back when I heard Mila's voice, soft and breezy. "This house belongs to me and my husband. We redesigned every corner ourselves." I froze. The room in front of me had changed. The orchid pot had been replaced by imported flowers. The warm yellow light swapped for a cold crystal chandelier. Every trace I'd left behind, gone. I went upstairs and flipped over the invitation card left on the desk. Beneath the heading, "A Private Gathering at the Whitmore Estate," the listed hosts read Wistan and Mila. I wasn't there. I wasn't even mentioned. That night, I handed the invitation to Wistan. No accusations, just one question. "Am I no longer part of this family?" He gave a strained smile. "It's just how it's worded, Mom. Everyone knows what it really means." No, no one knew. And maybe they didn't need to. At dinner, I sat in my usual seat left of Wistan. Mila pointed toward the end of the table. "That spot's for my best friend. Can you sit at the head?" Instead, Mom, I moved. No one noticed when I left early. No one saw the full plate still in front of me. Back in my room, I didn't bother closing the door all the way. There was nothing left to protect. The room that once felt warm now felt like a storage closet. Not part of the home anymore, just left over. I opened a drawer and pulled out the old photo album. One picture from Colorado stood out. I remembered it clearly. A stranger had taken it for us. I was on the left, my hand resting on my son's shoulder. But now I wasn't in the photo. The left edge had been cropped. Only Mila remained smiling, arm wrapped around Whiston. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't cry. I wasn't angry. I just felt it clearly and unmistakably. I was being erased from the place I had built. Quietly, no announcement, but in every small detail I was being written out of the story. I first began to feel like an outsider when Mila hired a new maid. She was young, fast-moving, and most notably, avoided eye contact with me whenever we passed in the hallway. The first time we met, I said gently, "You can call me Ms. Kelly." She smiled and nodded, but the next day I overheard her on the phone. "Yes, I'm just cleaning the room for Mr. Whiston's mother. No Ms. Kelly, no ma'am, just his mother. So cold, so distant, like I didn't belong here at all." I said nothing. I got used to breakfast being set for just the two of them and making my own. They changed the picture frames. Things I cherished were put away for neatness. One day the maid asked that old ceramic statue in the living room, "Do you still want it?" I was thinking of moving it to the basement. I nodded. I was starting to understand. One item at a time, my things were being cleared out. Little by little, the house no longer looked like the place I had lived in. A few days later, the roof started leaking after a night of heavy rain. I climbed up to the attic myself, flashlight in hand, carefully noting every spot where the water had seeped through. I planned to call Wes, the family's longtime handyman, the next morning. That evening, during the family meeting, Mila called it an internal discussion about finances. I said I checked the roof already. It needs fixing soon. "I'll call Wes." The room fell silent. Whiston frowned, then tossed his spoon onto the table with a clatter. His voice was sharp. "Can you please stop acting on your own? This is my house. Everything has to be discussed with me and Mila." I froze. That sentence, "This is my house," hit me like a slap in the face. I don't remember what I said, maybe nothing at all. I just remember feeling cold all over. And Whiston, he turned away like what he'd said was nothing out of the ordinary. That night when I returned to my room, I saw several large cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. The maid said casually, "Mrs. Mila asked me to clear out some of the downstairs stuff so we can reorganize and prepare for upgrades." I asked, "Upgrades for what?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I'm not entirely sure, but I think they might be listing this floor for rent on like Airbnb or something." I stood there motionless, and I understood. They didn't need me anymore. Not because I was old, not because it was difficult, but because I no longer fit into their life. I was part of what they wanted to clear out. They wanted me quiet, tidy, and unobtrusive. They wanted me gone. That Saturday night started out ordinary until it wasn't anymore. I heard a car pull up at 5, heels clicking, laughter drifting through the windows. Then came the smell of a strong, unfamiliar perfume, sharp foreign, creeping up the stairs. I went upstairs and asked Mila, "Are we having guests?" She didn't look up from her phone, just smiled faintly. "Oh, Whiston's business partners dropped by. Just a small thing, Mom. You should rest. It might be a little noisy tonight." I nodded. A small thing. But not even 30 minutes later, the entire house lit up like a gala. I was reviewing a stack of real estate documents when the maid knocked on my door. "Miss Kelly," she said, "Mrs. Mila asked if you could head to your room to rest. There'll be guests on the first floor. It might be a bit inconvenient." I frowned. Inconvenient? "This is my house." She froze, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm just following instructions. Just rest a bit. It might help you feel better." I stepped into the room. The door clicked shut behind me. Click. The lock. I turned around. The handle wouldn't budge. The door wouldn't open. I knocked. Then pounded harder, called out for my son. No response. Only the sound of music starting up, clinking glasses, chatter outside. But no one called for me, no one mentioned me. I sat down. My back chilled. My chest felt like it was weighed down with stone. Reflexively, I reached for my phone. No signal, just one faint, flickering bar. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the old voice recorder, the one I used to capture thoughts in case I forgot them later. The battery still had life. I pressed play. Mila's voice came through clear cold. The first floor will be for Airbnb. Don't worry about his mom. In a few months, I'll have the medical documents proving she's no longer mentally competent. I'm already working on it. I've scanned all the old paperwork and changed the names. Then a man's voice chimed in, deep concerned. You sure there won't be any legal issues? Mila answered casually. Ownership hasn't been officially transferred yet, but I've got the power of attorney. She didn't read it carefully. She's old. My hand slipped. The recorder dropped onto the bed. My eyes stayed fixed on the door. The room felt like it was closing in, tight, suffocating, like a trap. And then a sentence echoed in my head. Something the lawyer once told me long ago. Ms. Kelly, this power of attorney is only temporary. As long as you still hold the original title, deed, no one can take this house from you. I still had it. I always had it. And in that moment, I knew I had no other choice. This wasn't a party. It was the unveiling of a new world, one where I no longer existed. Whiston, my son, wasn't just silent. He had taken their side. And me, I wasn't going to sit quietly like some confused old woman anymore. They locked the door. But they never knew I kept the key. At dawn, the next morning, while the whole house was still asleep, heavy with wine and laughter, I opened the door. Spring-loaded latch. To someone who lived alone for 40 years, it wasn't a lock, just child's play. I left without a sound, carrying exactly 3 things: a brown leather handbag, the original notarized house deed, and the voice recorder. I didn't look back. My destination, a quiet cafe near the old law office of Mr. Harvey, retired 2 years ago, but still did friendly favors. He had once been my legal shield. Now was the time to use it. We sat down, no tears, no sob stories. I simply laid out the evidence, clear, precise, with motive, timeline, and names. He listened, nodded slowly, the kind of nod that came from someone who'd seen far too many dirty tricks in his time. They've got nothing if you have the original deed. That power of attorney is expired. And if the recording says what you claim, he paused, we can do more than just take the house back. I shook my head. I don't want to sue my son. I just want the truth. And for it to be public. He exhaled, then nodded again. I'll make the arrangements. A week later, I invited Whiston and Mila to a family dinner. They came guarded. Mila was dressed more conservatively than usual. Whiston looked at me like he was awaiting a verdict. On the table, corn soup, grilled salmon, and a thick folder placed squarely in the center. I began to speak. Do you remember the first day we started building this house? Whiston, I asked. You were 13, insisting on mixing cement with your own hands. He gave a tight smile. I remember, it was fun. I nodded. I once told you I built this place so you'd always have somewhere to come back to. Mila cut in, her voice soft, almost sweet. We know how much this house means to you, but sometimes time forces things to change. I looked her straight in the eyes, and because of that, you thought you had the right to change the name on the ownership papers. Silence. I slid the folder to the center of the table. These are the house documents. Notarized, original, untouched. And this, I turned on the voice recorder, is the plan to take it from me by declaring I'm mentally unfit. Mila's voice played sharp, cold, calculated. Whiston stood up, stunned. You recorded us. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just spoke steady and clear. I recorded it to survive. No mother ever thinks she'll need to do that. But a woman who's lived through enough learns to prepare for the worst. I pulled out the legal notice prepared by Mr. Harvey. It reinstated my full control over the property and nullified any future transfer attempts unless confirmed in writing by me. You're still welcome to live here, I said, but on my terms. If not, you can speak to my lawyer. Whiston dropped back into his seat, eyes reddening. Mila said nothing. The mask of civility was gone. Her hostility is no longer hidden. I stood up. For the first time in years, I was standing in my home, not cold, not trembling, just certain of who the owner was and who the guests were. Less than a week later, Mila hosted another gathering. This time, it wasn't a small gathering. It was an investor networking event with imported wine, French hors d'oeuvres, and a miniature model of the villa set in the center of the living room as the crown jewel of $1 million pitch. But this time, I wasn't locked in my room. I wore a silk dress in deep green, the color my late husband once said makes your eyes light up. Pinned to my collar was a silver brooch engraved with his name, and I stood right in the main hall before a single guest stepped through the door. The first to see me was Whiston. He froze, then walked over and whispered, "Mom, this event's important. Can you let us handle it?" I smiled softly but firmly. "I am handling it, son." Mila followed close behind. She didn't smile, didn't pretend anymore. The guests took their seats. Spotlights beamed down on the villa model. Mila began her pitch. "Welcome everyone to Airway Heritage, a model vacation estate we've spent the past 2 years developing." I spoke up, not loudly but clearly enough to stop the room cold. "Excuse me. Before we continue talking about this house, I need to clarify a small matter." All eyes turned toward me. I didn't tremble. I wasn't angry. I was precise. "My name is Kelly Honora Whitmore, and I am the sole legal and moral owner of this villa." I pulled the folder from my handbag and placed it on the center table. "This is the original property deed. Notarized, signed in 1996, it has never been transferred." I looked directly at Mila, then pressed play on the voice recorder. "And this is a conversation between her and a partner discussing how to force me out of my own home by declaring me mentally unfit." Mila's voice filled the room, sharp as a blade, each word crisp and undeniable. The living room fell into stunned silence. One of the investors stood up and set his wine glass down. "You're pitching a project on a property you don't even own." Mila froze in. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. I thought, everything was all ready. I cut her off. "I've submitted all the documents to the land registry office. As of today, any activity related to this house requires my signature. Without it, it's illegal." Whiston stepped forward, eyes pleading. "Mom, I'm sorry. I thought you didn't want to deal with this anymore, so you thought I wasn't lucid enough to deal with it. Isn't that right?" I looked him straight in the eye, deep, unflinching. "You let your wife draw up a plan to erase me from my own home. You knew, but you stayed silent. You even signed off on guardianship papers." Wistan bowed his head, voice cracking. I I just wanted to keep the peace. Mila said she'd leave if I didn't. I gave a small nod. "And so you traded me for your version of peace." Silence. No one defended them. Another investor stood. "I don't do business with people who betray their own family." A second, then a third. One by one, they walked out. Mila whispered something to Whiston. The two of them slipped away into the back of the house. I didn't stop them. I turned back to the room, shaking hands with the few guests who remained. One elderly woman older than me gripped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she said. "My daughter-in-law pushed me out of my home once, but I never had the courage to speak up." I smiled. I wasn't brave. I just refused to be erased from my own story. That night, I sat alone in the living room. No one chased me out. No one sighed at my presence. I turned on the warm yellow light. I played the jazz my husband loved, poured myself a glass of red wine. I hadn't won yet, but I had reclaimed my right to exist. And for me, that was the beginning of freedom. I didn't kick them out. Wistan and Mila still lived upstairs, but from then on, there wasn't a single party I wasn't invited to. No more door locks from the outside. And certainly, no more private meetings about nursing homes or changing ownership. I gave them two choices, very clear: live transparently or leave quietly. They chose to stay, but this time it was with the truth. I no longer appeared in the kitchen every morning like before. I hired someone to renovate the first floor, repainting walls, changing curtains, clearing out what was no longer mine. I began again, in the very house that had once been taken over by relatives. I opened a small class teaching meditation and space design for older women. They came one by one, each bringing different stories that strangely sounded the same. Children no longer listen. Husbands treat them like they're invisible. Society pushes them aside, labeling them no longer useful. But here we don't sit to complain. We learn to rewrite the final chapters of our lives with our own hands. One afternoon, I found a card slipped under the door. Hand drawn, still a little messy, but I recognized it immediately. It was from Ellie, my granddaughter. Grandma, I want to learn to draw like you. Mom says you once designed the house. Will you teach me? I held the card in my hand, my heart full of emotion. A child who knew nothing about inheritance laws or whose name was on the land title. She only knew who had built the house she always called home. I, though once crossed out from invitations, erased from photos, was never crossed out of her heart. I didn't respond with hatred. I didn't need to break or retaliate. I just reminded them of one thing. I had once been the root, and if they chose to forget, then I would be the one to stand up and reaffirm myself. I never thought that a few meditation sessions in an old room would become something so big. At first, it was just a few acquaintances. Mrs. Sloan, who lived at the end of the street, once threatened by her son to be sent to a nursing home because she often forgot to turn off the stove. Miss Beatrice, retired only 2 months a lifelong chief accountant, now told by her husband to step back to make things easier. They came, quietly, sometimes even shy to say their real names. I didn't ask, I just laid out a mat in the middle of the room, played soft music, and let everyone sit down. No one judged anyone. No one needed to complain. But then stories began to flow out. Pieces. Cracks that society had glued over with the phrase, "At this age, resting is right." They didn't want to rest. They wanted to be present. One day, Mrs. Teresa, silver-haired but eyes bright like fire, said, "Why do people think we're worthless just because we're old? Old men are still called veterans, but we get pushed aside because we don't know how to use Instagram." We laughed, but no one found it funny. And so the idea began to take shape. We created a YouTube channel. I named it Women Who Never Fade. The first video was of me opening a drawing class, hands slightly trembling but lines still steady. Mrs. Sloan teaches how to plan menus for elderly people living alone. Miss Beatrice live streaming a financial advice session for retired women. 1 week, 1,000 views. 3 weeks, over 10,000. We started receiving messages from everywhere. My mother is also being pushed out of her own room by her daughter-in-law. I'm 70 years old and never felt I had the right to speak up until I watched your videos. We are not activists, not political, not a movement. We are simply women who were once pushed to the margins and decided to return to the center. I look at them, once shy, now standing in front of the camera, speaking every word clearly. I'm not fading away. I'm just blooming late. Someone once asked me, if they apologize, would you forgive them? I don't have a definite answer, because sometimes forgiveness isn't about saying it out loud. It's about not letting them make you disappear again. If your own children lock you away like a burden, would you forgive them just for the sake of family, or would you stand up and reclaim your identity like I did?